Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things I want to mention is you want to make sure that you're wearing hand and eye protection at all times. Now we're going to have to drain the coolant on this, so we're going to come right over to the coolant reservoir, which is located right up here on the passenger side, grab onto that cap, and just make sure that it's nice and cool to the touch. That's super important. We'll press this down, turn it counterclockwise, and remove it away from our faces. Inspect it, set it aside. And now we're going to make our way over to the driver's side of the radiator. Go ahead and follow that all the way down to the bottom corner, and you're going to be able to find the petcock. That's the drain for the cooling system. Now you're going to want to make sure that you have a nice collection bucket underneath this so you can go ahead and collect all that coolant so you can recycle it in the future. Now what I generally like to have is a nice hose like this so I can slide it onto that drain right there, and then this is going to lead down towards the bucket to direct it for me so it doesn't spill all over the place. I'll go ahead and put this right on the bottom of that petcock. Should slide right on. Now once we have that on there, we'll just go ahead and get the bucket ready. Now I'm going to turn that petcock counterclockwise here and unscrew it a little bit and wait for it to start draining. Why isn't it? So now while that's draining, we're going to talk about the valve covers. You're going to have two of these. You have one on the driver's side, which is pretty much out in the open. There really isn't too much we're going to have to do for this one. But the one on the passenger side, as you can tell, has a whole bunch of miscellaneous things that are going to be in the way that we're going to have to be able to remove so we can get to that valve cover. With that said, let's go ahead and use a blowgun here, and we're just going to blow off any debris that might be inside the area. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is remove this right along here. You're going to be able to find your air temp sensor. We want to go ahead and disconnect that. So if you look at it, you can see that it has a red tab. Let's go ahead and draw that away. And then right here, there's a little tab that you can press on, and then you can separate this. Every time you disconnect an electrical connector, just take a peek. Make sure you don't see any funny colors. If you do, it's corrosion and it probably needs to be dealt with. We'll set that aside, and now we'll move along to this clamp right here. Go ahead and loosen this up just enough so we can slide this off. We'll use an 8mm for that. Little tug. And now we can come over to this side. We'll pop these two clips. Lift this up and off of here. Grab the air filter, inspect it, set that aside. Now the next thing we want to do is go ahead and take this hose. We'll pull it off of there. Generally, whenever I remove a hose, I always like to give it a little squeeze and inspect it. Make sure it's not dry rotted, cracked, or broken in any way. We'll set that aside, and now we can go ahead and grab onto this box. Now for the box itself, it's going to have 3 pitons underneath that are kind of pressed into the body. So what we want to do is just kind of grab onto this and carefully try to lift it up. There's one side, and now we can try to get the other two. There we are. Let's go ahead and set this aside. Next, we can move along to our coolant reservoir. We're going to go ahead and grab onto this clamp with some pliers, and we can go ahead and slide this hose right off. Grab the hose, we'll give it a little twist. Inspect it like I said before, set it aside. Now we're going to move along to this hose here. Go ahead and give that hose a little squeeze and slide it off just like before. Just keep in mind that there could potentially still be some coolant inside the reservoir. Once that hose is off of there, continue on to your 2 mounting nuts. You're going to find one on the driver's side, and then if you follow it over, you're going to find one over on the passenger side. Use a 10mm to remove the pair. Let's go ahead and carefully grab onto this. We'll slide it off of here and get it out of the way. Now we're going to move along to these two lines right here. You're going to find several brackets on these that are made of plastic. Typically what you want to do is just use a flathead screwdriver, and you want to try to get in between the two plastics of the clamshell. This kind of squeezes together. This would be the opening side on this one. So what you want to do is just go ahead and stick the screwdriver in there. You can start on one side, go ahead and stick it in and then twist it, and then over here you do the same thing in the center. You can see essentially what those clips look like. They just slide right into their locking position. Give that a little wiggle. Now we'll follow this up to this area here. This one looks like somebody already broke it. So basically with this one, you'd basically do the same thing. Just kind of get in between, try to twist it and separate those tabs that I showed you on the other one, and then, you know, just kind of separate it as well. Get this off of here. Pull the line out of there. There we are. Once you have both those off, follow those hoses up to where they connect into the heater core. That's going to be located on the firewall of your vehicle. You're going to find clamps for those hoses, so just go ahead and squeeze on them. You can use a hose clamp, plier, or whatever you might happen to have. We'll just squeeze the clamp, we'll slide it down the hose. Squeeze on that clamp. Now that I have it squeezed, I'm going to go ahead and grab onto the hose. We'll give it a little twist. We can remove that from the heater core, inspect it, set it aside, do the same to the other one. Grab onto those hoses. We're just going to carefully try to slide these aside. While we're doing that, we're paying attention to this forward area here. We want to essentially pull them right out of this bracket. The next thing we're going to do is pull this right off of here so we can start dismounting this from the area. Now we can grab onto that. We'll give it a little twist, pull it right off of there, set that aside. With that out of the way, let's start unbolting this. I'm going to start with the hardest one, which is right down here. We'll use an 8mm to start removing this. Now before we go ahead and take that unit off, let's just go ahead and grab onto this. We'll separate this. Now we can grab onto this whole thing, remove it from the vehicle. Now let's follow this tube right here to its elbow. Go ahead and grab onto that. We're going to give it a little wiggle, lift it up. And we can take this, slide it, and get it out of our way. Let's go ahead and grab onto the wiring right here. I'm going to give this a little wiggle. You can see that there's an anchor bracket right here for the wiring harness. There we are. You're going to find another one in the center of the valve cover right here. Go ahead and see if we can get this one up as well. There we are. Come back to this one right here. We'll give this a little twist and we'll try to lift it up. Go ahead and set that aside. Now that we have plenty of slack, we're going to start disconnecting our fuel injectors. You're going to have 3 of them on each side of the vehicle. For these, you want to go ahead and grab onto that red tab. We're going to slide it up and away, and then we can squeeze this tab and remove it. Inspect it, set it aside, move along to the others. That's good. Now we'll come to the front of the valve cover here. Go ahead and press on this tab. That unlocks it. We can lift this right up and off of there. That just gives us a little bit more slack here. Let's just take a rag and we're going to put it right into this area right here, being very careful not to press too hard on that. And then we'll continue on with another rag and we're going to come right into this hole right here. We're getting to the point that we're going to start removing the valve cover, but as you probably noticed, there's a lot of debris in the area again. So let's just go ahead and use some compressed air and just make sure it's all out of the way. Now it's time to start unmounting the valve cover from the engine. You're going to find 10 mounting bolts. You're going to notice some of them look a little different. Some of them have a flat 10mm headed bolt like this, and then others will have a stud on them like this. It's a good idea to mark these, so essentially you're going to know exactly where all the studded ones are, so when we go to put this all back together, they're going to be in the exact same order. To do this, I'm just going to use a crayon, and I can just mark right on the valve cover. Obviously I can wash it off when I'm done. Let's see, this one all the way in the back is another one. For the lower bolts, we've got this one, that one, that one. Double check to make sure you mark them all, and then let's continue by removing them. I'm going to use my 10mm and a swivel with an extension, try to remove the hardest bolt on the bottom rear here.
Congratulations.
All right, we've got that one loose. Let's continue on. Nice and loose. With this all completely unbolted, we can continue on by grabbing onto the wiring. We're just going to carefully try to pull it up and towards the center of the engine. That way there we can start grabbing onto this valve cover, separate it from the engine, and then we're going to carefully bring it out. Alright, so now if it seems as though the valve cover is stuck anywhere, usually it's because maybe one of the screws or a couple of the bolts is still in there a couple threads. Like this one right here, you can tell, isn't completely unthreaded. Let's go ahead and turn that a little bit more, and now I can get a little bit more movement out of this. We're just going to try to lift this up towards me. Slide it out and away from the engine. Now we can start removing our valve cover gasket. To clean this down, what we want to do is just come over to a nice bench. We can go ahead and grab onto the mounting hardware, make sure that it is marked where all the studded units are. We'll just go ahead and grab onto it, give it a little wiggle, and we can pop it right out of there. We'll do the same to all these mounting bolts right here. Once we have it completely stripped down, we can clean down the cover itself. Grab the gasket. Just use a small flathead screwdriver, whatever you might happen to have, even a pick would work. Get right underneath there, pull it right out of here. Now we can set this aside and wash down our valve cover. Once you have all the mounting hardware cleaned to your liking, let's continue on by grabbing one and some lube, and we're just going to go ahead and put this right along the shaft area here. Once you have that on there, you can go ahead and take some of your new boots, and we're just going to go ahead and start sliding this on. You want to pay attention to this nubbed area here. That's going to be facing towards my finger, and I'm going to press the flat edge up against the flat washer edge of the mounting hardware. And press it right on there. Slide it in, give it a little twist, and then do the same to all. Now that we have all those done, we're going to move along to installing the valve cover gasket into the valve cover. Now you're going to notice in your set, it comes with two separate gaskets because if you were to look at the valve covers themselves, they are technically shaped a little bit different. So just find the proper one. Once you find the proper one, all we're going to do is just gently line it all up. Try to get this into order here. You can start anywhere you want. Generally, I start on a corner. Then we'll just start pressing this down and into the valve cover. It's very important to make sure that you completely press it in so that it's secured. Now that I feel as though I have it completely inserted into the valve cover, the next thing that I always like to do is just go ahead and rest it down, face down like this on a nice clean surface. All right, let's turn this over. Give it a quick inspection real quick. This looks great. So now we can continue on to installing our mounting hardware. Now you remember we marked the areas where all those studded mounting hardwares are going to be. So essentially what I want to do is just go ahead and grab onto it, and we're going to take it and go ahead and press it right into the valve cover. Listen for a little click, give it a wiggle, make sure it's semi-secure. Obviously, if I tug it real hard, I can pull it out, but essentially we just want to make sure it doesn't fall out while we're trying to get it into the vehicle. Let's continue on by putting in all the rest of our hardware. Double check to make sure the hardware doesn't fall out. And now we can get back over to the vehicle. Now at this point we can move along to cleaning up the engine. The area that we want to clean up the engine is exactly where the gasket's going to ride. You can tell that I have a lot of dirt and debris inside the localized area. So to scrape this off, what I want to do is just take a nice rag, and I'm essentially just going to try to pack it right inside here, kind of like a little catch for any debris that might happen to fall off. After that, we can just grab a nice flat blade razor like this, and then we'll just gently scrape it. When we scrape it, we want to try to collect any of this debris, like I said. You don't want to have it falling into the engine. Just like it wants to do. Now, once you have the engine safely scraped down, let's continue on with a nice clean rag and a little bit of parts cleaner. Get that nice and wet. And now we're just going to go ahead and wipe down the entire area that we went ahead and scraped down. The reason why we want to do this is because we're trying to get off any of the oily residue that might be on this. So when we put on the brand new gasket, it doesn't look as though we have an oil leak already. Now before we go ahead and slide it in, just take another quick peek at the engine just to ensure that there's no debris or any oily residue. We'll go ahead and slide this into position here, being very careful not to damage our gasket or lose any of our hardware along the way. Be very careful for your wiring. I'm going to say it feels like I'm just going to try to roll this down and into position here. There we are. Slide it right down. And now we can just start in all of our mounting bolts by hand. Once we have them started, we can bottom them out, and then we'll torque them all to manufacturer specification. Popped out of there. Now once we have them all started, let's go ahead and start bottoming them out. We're going to start in the center and then make our way towards each side. Now that they're all bottomed out, let's go ahead and torque each of these to 105 inch-pounds. Now once you have all those torqued, let's go ahead and reconnect in our fuel injectors. We're going to listen for a click. We'll give it a little tug, and now typically they should have that red lock on it. This one right here broke, but all the rest of them still have them on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and press in all the rest. We got a click, we'll give it a tug, and then we're just going to go ahead and lock it in. That down there. Double check it, make sure it's locked. Get this one in as well. Check it. Make sure it's locked in. Now you have the anchor points for these. We're just going to slide it right over the studs. Press it down on there. We'll do the same on this one. Once that's secured, let's move down along this area. This is where the filler neck is supposed to be. I'm just going to go ahead and pull out this safety rag here. And then we'll continue on with our flat blade razor. And we're just going to go ahead and clean this up as well. We have a gasket that's going to need to be here, so you want to make sure it's as clean as possible, free of any debris and oil in the end. Let's see if we can get the majority of this out of here. Now a nice clean rag with some parts cleaner. We'll just go ahead and wipe this down. Next, we're going to move along to cleaning up the oil filler tube. Now for this, you're going to find that you have the gasket that's supposed to press right up against the engine. It's always a good idea to go ahead and replace that. Should come with your kit anyway. So we're just going to go ahead and pick that right out. There we are. And now the next thing you want to do is just go ahead and try to clean it up. What you're probably going to notice is that there's a lot of debris inside this area here. This is very common. You can go ahead and take this to the parts cleaner or whatever you have to do. But essentially, as long as the area where the gasket's going to be and all along this flat area here is nice and clean, you should be all set. Once this is nice and clean, let's continue on with our gasket. We're just going to line it up so it's in position here. We'll start pressing this in. There we are. Just go ahead and make your finger all the way around this. You just want to make sure that it's completely in there. If it happens to fall out or fall in some way, of course you might end up having an oil leak. All right, now we can get ready to put this onto the vehicle. Let's go ahead and carefully put it into position here. Now when you look at your mounting bolts, you're going to find that you have 3 that look the same. One of them has that little stud on it. Let's start with the one that has the stud. For that one, we're going to come right up here to this top corner. Go ahead and start that right in there. We'll start in the other 3 and then we can snug them up. Now let's go ahead and torque these to 105 inch-pounds as well. Okay friends, we're getting ready to start doing our driver's side valve cover. Now for this, of course, when we do it, at the end, you're going to want to make sure that you go ahead and do an oil change as well. So make sure you have a filter handy. Let's start off by blowing off some of the debris in the area here. The next thing that I always like to do is look at the wiring. A lot of times you're going to find some securing points that mount to the bolts or the studs of the bolts that hold the valve cover to the engine. So any of the areas that you see that have wiring that lead to them, we just want to go ahead and try to pry them up and off of the studs. See if I can find a good spot here. There we are. Now for this one, we've got a pretty good amount of slack, but let's go ahead and follow it down to the front of the valve cover here. You can see that there's also another mounting point for some wiring. We need to go ahead and pry that off of there as well.
Yeah.
All right, there's that piece. Let's go ahead and follow it up here. Now we're going to look for any other places that look like it secures the wires to the valve cover here. There's one right up in this area right here. You can tell because it's got this plastic piece. Just grab onto that with the hook as well. Try to pull that up and off of there. Okay. Now we're going to move along to disconnecting our fuel injectors. For these, they're going to have some red locking tabs. They're not something that you can see from this camera angle, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disconnect it real quick and then I'll show you. I'll use my pick, come along the other side. We'll lift up on that. Once it's unlocked, you can just go ahead and grab onto the tab. We'll give it a squeeze and disconnect it. Inspect it real quick. All right, so now we're just going to give it a quick inspection, make sure we don't see any funny colors or corrosion. It looks okay. So now I'll show you the locking tab. Now for the locking tab, when it's locked, it's in this position right here. So all I did was grab onto it, I slid it up like this, and then I pressed on this tab right here with my index finger, which unlocked it completely, and then we slid it right off. We're going to do the same to the other two. This one's really hard to get to. See if we can find that last one all the way in the back there. Pull up on that tab. Pull that off of there. Inspect it. So this side. All right, so now at this point we should have plenty of slack from this area right here to be able to squeeze the valve cover out and through. But if you feel as though you want just a little bit more, we can come up here and we'll just disconnect this coil. Squeeze the tab right where my thumb is. We'll go ahead and pull it right off. Inspect it as always. And now, as you can tell, we've got a lot more room in this area. The next thing we're going to do is move along to starting to remove some of our mounting bolts for this. What you're going to find on this is that several of them are going to have some studs on them that look just like this, and then others are pretty much just going to be a flat head that looks like this one right here. It's a good idea to go ahead and mark the valve cover with a little bit of crayon or whatever you might happen to have where all the studs are. One here. One all the way over here. This is super important for when you're mounting your wiring and everything back in. It's pretty much where the holding points are. One back there, nope. Okay, so that back bottom corner, got another stud, right? Is that one? Yeah. So we got the back bottom corner. We've got this one right here. Another one right next to it. And then just feel my hands across this. And then we have our far forward one on the bottom. That's also a stud. So at this point, we found 4 studs. We've got them marked. It's very common when you're cleaning things down for them to lose their markings, so just take a quick note of that as well. All right, so now we're at the point that we're going to start removing all of our hardware. I'm going to start with the hardest one. That's pretty much this one down here, and it's only really difficult because of the angle due to the battery and everything. So I'm just going to use a 10mm with an extension. You can use whatever you've got. Slide it right over the stud there, and then we can get our ratchet on and start removing it. Out of here. All right. That's nice and loose at this point. I can feel it wobbling around. I'll continue on to the rest.
I'm actually good.
Let's move this out of that way then. Still good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Got that moving around freely. Let's grab that last one all the way in the back there on the bottom. Now at this point, I have all 5 along the bottom nice and loose, so I'll continue up to the top, which overall should be a lot easier to get to, and then we can start removing the valve cover. Now let's do that back top bolt here. Okay, moving along, we'll grab this stud. Please go on. Last one. So now at this point we have all of our hardware nice and loose. So I want to continue on by removing the valve cover. Now for this I'm just going to kind of wiggle it around a little bit and see if I can break it free. If for some reason it doesn't want to come free from the engine, it's very common for the gasket to just generally be stuck because it's on there for a very long period of time. I'm just going to use a nice flat screwdriver like this, and I'm going to carefully get in between the engine and the valve cover itself. Once I get it in between this area, I'm going to gently try to twist and pry, but I want to be very careful not to damage the plastic valve cover in any way. If I did, I would have to replace the whole valve cover. Get this moving around. I still kind of feel like it's kind of attached someplace on the bottom, so it's very common for these bolts, even though you think you got them all the way loose, sometimes they're just on there by maybe a thread or maybe even two, and that can just kind of hang you up. So just go ahead and make your way around, get everything so it's nice and loose, and we can get the valve cover out of the way. Okay. Now I'm going to carefully start lifting this up and try dragging it right out through the front here. If you find that you're having a hard time trying to get this to fit out of here, it's more than likely due to the fact that the wiring right here can be a little bit taut and it's kind of holding down that back corner a little bit. If that's the case, you can just continue on by disconnecting some more of these ignition coils by squeezing the tab in the center. We'll go ahead and give this a little tug, inspect it like always, and then it should give us just a teeny bit more slack, so we should be able to do our job. Getting close here. Now I can see where I'm hitting, right along this area right here, and right up along the forward area right here. So we're just gonna have to do a little bit of finagling to try to scoot it out of there. Generally, if I don't have to, I don't want to disconnect a fuel line, only because it's gonna make a mess, you're gonna have fuel vapors, and of course it is potentially dangerous. There's our valve cover. Let's go ahead and start washing it down. All right, so I cleaned up my valve cover just like we did before. As you can tell, everywhere that the gasket's supposed to be is clean and free of any debris. We can set that aside, and then we'll just continue on to all of our bolts. We're just going to remove all the rubbers like what we had before. We'll get it so it's just plain like this, add a little bit of grease, and put on some brand new boots. Now, once we have all those done, let's continue on by putting on our valve cover gasket. For this, generally, I just lay it across the top. I make sure that it matches up completely, and then we can just start lining it up and pressing it in. All right, so now once you feel as though you put it all in, all the way around, the next thing you want to do is just double check and even triple check just to ensure that it's completely in the entire way around. A very easy way of doing this is just go ahead and turn it over onto a nice clean flat surface, set it down, and then we'll just gently press down and try to lock it in. Okay. So now that we pressed it down, let's just take another quick peek at it just to ensure that it's completely inside the valve cover. This looks amazing. Now for our next step, we're just going to go ahead and bring this right over to the vehicle. We're going to slide it into position, and then we can take our mounting hardware and put it on there. The reason why we're doing that in this aspect is because there is wiring that comes over to the top, and we don't want to go ahead and get it caught on any of these bolts. All right, so we're back over at the engine here. Before we go ahead and put that onto the engine, let's just have a quick peek at the area where the gasket's going to sit. As you can tell on this one, we have a lot of debris in this area. You're going to want to make sure that you clean all of this off of there so the seal is going to be able to do its job and not leak any oil after you're done. Now all this debris here, you want to make sure that it doesn't fall into the engine. So if you want to just take a rag or a piece of paper or whatever you might happen to have, we'll just go ahead and try to stick it in here carefully. It needs to be in a way that you can go ahead and take it right back out, obviously. And then we can start scraping this onto our cloth or whatever you used, and then we'll just remove it from the area. All right, so I have the engine all cleaned up. We're going to get ready to slide in this valve cover. We still have our markings where all of our studs were supposed to be, so we're not super worried about that. We can go ahead and start sliding this underneath the wiring, being very careful not to drop anything inside the engine. If you feel as though there's a chance that anything might have fallen inside, you need to go ahead and get this out of the way and just double check. There we are. Now before we go ahead and put in any of our mounting hardware, just take a quick peek all the way around all the edges. If you see any blue looking like it's sticking out of there, obviously that's the valve cover gasket. It must have came loose for some reason. You're just going to want to go ahead and pull this back off of here and re-secure it. I'm going to start right up here on the forward corner. I'm just going to make my way down the line along the top here. That's going to hold the valve cover in position, so then I can continue on by doing my lower ones. So now at this point I have all the top ones started in. We can continue on by doing the lower bolts. Please just start in. Now that we have all the mounting bolts started, let's continue on by snugging them up. When I do this, I always like to start from the center of the valve cover, and then I'm going to make my way towards each end. Get my arm out of the way here in a sec. Top up here. I'll get right out of the way in one sec. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't like this angle. It's too much for the swivel. Okay, top and the rear. You see it back there?
Oh, yeah.
Do you need me to move anything, or are you good?
Lower that. I went to the bottom one.
Oh, I could have went that one if you wanted.
That's fine.
Now that we have them all bottomed out, let's go ahead and torque these to 105 inch-pounds. When we do this, of course, we're going to be starting from the center, making our way towards each side. Come on. I know what goes on. Please just go on. All right, so now that we have all those torqued, let's start plugging everything in and re-securing the wiring. Now for this forward one right here, I'm just going to go ahead and slide this over the bottom stud. See okay or no? It's like right here. I think if anything, my hands are
Your
probably
hands
away.
are away, but that's
Good.
okay. Yeah, I got it.
Go ahead and slide that right down on there. Make sure it feels as though it's secured. Now we can take this one right here. This slides onto this stud. Start plugging all this in. We have our fuel injector. Remember the lock on those, right? Essentially, you just want to take that. We're going to slide it right on. Listen for a click. There it is. And then we're going to take that red slider, slide it right down towards the engine. That's what's going to lock it in. Give it a little tug. Make sure it's secure. Plug in your ignition coils along the way, any of them that you had to have removed. Listen for a click, give it a tug, make sure it's secure. Just go ahead and do the same to all. Get that fuel injector into there. Got a click, lock it in, give it a tug, coil. We have our bracket right along here. I'm going to skip right past that for a second, and we're going to plug in this fuel injector while we can still get to it. Slide that in. Listen for that click. Slide down the red tab. Give that a tug as well. Now we can re-secure this as well. We're just going to slide that right onto that stud. Okay. Make sure all your wires are nice and tucked in. Double check everything to make sure that you re-secured everything. And of course, it's completely plugged in. Give them all a little wiggle. Everything right here looks perfect. Now we can start putting this tube in place. It's going to end up coming underneath your AC line right across here. So we're just going to go ahead and press it towards the back of the engine, gently start pulling it underneath this area here. And now we can start putting this on over here. Slide it right down onto there. You want to make sure you slide it down as far as it can go. You don't want it coming loose while you're driving down the road. There's that. That feels good. Now we can continue on to these two hoses here. Now you really can't mix these up because if you were to look at them, you can see that they're a totally different size. One's larger than the other. And if you were to look at the heater core, you can also tell that one's larger than the other. Now we can start putting our hoses on here. I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze on this clamp right there. We'll get the hose slid onto the heater core as far as it can go. We'll put the clamp back into the original position that we removed it from. Then we'll give it a nice little tug. Obviously we don't want to break anything, but you do want to make sure that it's completely secured to the heater core. Let's do this one as well. Now we can go ahead and put in this rearward bracket right here. Obviously, it should look a little bit different. It should come approximately out to there, and this should actually open up, so you can go ahead and put it over both of these lines. What we want to do is just take this area right there, slide it over that top rear stud there, and then of course we'll get these lined up so they can be secured. Can't see it once I get my thing in there. Can you see it?
Well, I can see where it is. That's a good spot.
Can't see it though. I feel like I'm over it, but
Yeah,
not
it
on
looks
it.
like you're right there.
Try to get this in a position. And then if it wasn't broken, you would just make sure that both of them are lined up, and then you would just latch it in so they're completely secured. Now let's do the forward one. Move these lines out of the way. We'll slide it right onto that stud. Pull the lines up and over it. Line them up with their corresponding holes, and then lock them in. Give it a tug. Make sure they're nice and secure so they can't wobble around. You don't want them to get caught on anything and get damaged. Now we can put on our coolant reservoir. To do that, I'm just going to come right here. I'm going to go ahead and put on the lower hose. Slide that up as far as it can go. We'll put the clamp into position here. Try to get that back in its original position. Now we're going to take this and we're going to line up both of the ears with their corresponding mounting studs. Install your mounting nuts and snug them up. Now let's go ahead and get this hose up on here. Slide it on there. Now let's follow this hose right here, and we're going to connect it into this crossover tube that's right there. Let's go ahead and put the two together. Now we can install our air filter box. You want to pay attention to all of your little nubs along the bottom here and make sure that you line them up with the corresponding holes in the body of the vehicle as we start pressing this down into place. Give that a little tug, make sure it's secure. Now we can connect on this hose. This is for your breather. It's a good idea to take a peek inside this area right there. There's kind of like a little breather filter inside these typically. Nobody ever thinks about replacing them, as you can tell on this one. All you'd really have to do is just go ahead and grab onto it and pull it right out. This one's pretty much disintegrated. Go ahead and install your air filter. Now we can get ready to install the rest of this. Before we go ahead and connect in the tube, obviously you want to make sure that you go ahead and pull out the rag that we put inside the throttle body here. Take a quick peek inside there and just make sure you didn't drop anything inside. Slide this right on there. Now we're going to wait on tightening this down because we're still going to be moving this around quite a bit to try to get this lined up. On the bottom side of this, what you're going to notice is you have 4 little tabs. Those need to fit into their corresponding holes on the lower aspect of the box. There we are, slide that in. We'll roll this down, latch it in. Now we're going to come right over here. You just want to make sure that this hose is completely mounted up against the throttle body. We'll go ahead and snug that up with our 8mm socket. Give it a nice tug. You want to make sure that it's secure. You don't want any dirty or unmetered air making its way into the engine. After that, let's go ahead and grab onto this sensor wire here. Inspect it once again. We'll just go ahead and clip it in. Listen for a click. Give it a tug. Lock it down. Now we're at the point that we're going to go ahead and put in our drain plug here. Slide it right in there. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that you completely screw it all the way in. And then once it feels as though it bottomed out, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a little extra here and make sure it's not loose in any way. If you used a drain hose, go ahead and remove that now. And now let's continue by filling it. All right, now at this point, we're going to come right over here to our coolant reservoir. This is how we're going to fill the cooling system. If you were to look at this, you can see right down along this area here, it says cold fill. It has an arrow that comes right up to this center line right there. So that's the area that we're going to have to fill this up to before we go ahead and start the vehicle. Let's use our manufacturer specified fluid in this. Okay friends, we got that valve cover job done. What's left to do now? Now you're going to want to make sure that you go ahead and do an oil change. When you do the oil change, make sure that you also replace that oil filter. It's going to be super important. Other than that, make sure that you use the manufacturer specified oil for this, also important. And then of course, once you got it running, you're going to want to make sure that you put the heat in the high position inside the vehicle. Let the vehicle run for a little bit so you can burp out any air inside the cooling system. After that, hop back out here. You're going to double check that oil level, make sure it's perfect. Come over here to the coolant, double check that as well, make sure that's perfect. Then you just go ahead and take this cap right here. We'll put it right on. Make sure it's nice and tight. And now we're going to go for a road test. When you're on your road test, make sure you have plenty of heat coming from those vents. And then when you come back, just double check to make sure you don't have any leaks. Thanks for watching.